Good morning and welcome to Exporting Excise Alcohol Goods, brought to you by the Department for International Trade Southwest and Business West. My name is Mark and I work with the events team here at DIT. Before we start today's event, here are some housekeeping points. If you're having any technical difficulties, please type them into the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen and direct them to DITSW events, and I will endeavour to help. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat tab. We have allowed time for these at the end to be answered. And we'll get through all the questions we can, but those we're unable to answer, we will follow up after the event. Finally, please note this event will be recorded. I'm now pleased to introduce from the Department for International Trade Southwest, my colleague, Hilary Charman. Over to you, Hilary. Okay, so we seem to be having a small issue from Hilary herself. I'm now pleased to introduce Neil. Over to you, Neil, to start us off today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Neil Markendale Bratell, and as you can see there, the very nice letters at the end of my name, OCX retired, means that I was a senior officer in the Customs and Excise and later on Revenue and Customs for some 47 years. I retired at the end of 2017. The last 25 years of my service within Revenue and Customs was actually as a senior officer in the policy team dealing with the holding and movement of excise goods, which basically meant that I was involved in the writing of the law with regards to the holding movement of excise goods in the UK and in the EU before Brexit. So hopefully I do know what I'm talking about. Not all, because we never stop learning. And the last two letters, of course, JP, means that I am a Justice of the Peace, sitting as a single magistrate in the courts in the UK, sending horrible, nasty people to prison and things like that. We have a couple of rules, or I have a couple of additional extra rules from what Hilary would have mentioned to you. And that is that there are no silly questions. Everything is a good question. It's only silly if I can't give an answer to it. And secondly, that we don't like any stress. Please don't get stressed about this. We can always solve problems. Excise is complicated, yes, but there are always answers, and we're always here to get you out of any trouble that you may be in. And finally, a little mantra that I tend to put out on these courses, and that is, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, which basically means if you've got the knowledge that somebody else doesn't have, you have got an advantage over them. And what I hope to do today is to give you a small amount of advantage when you're dealing with anybody in relationship to exporting goods from the UK after the 1st of January 2021. So, we are now no longer members of the European Union. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that's not something that we're going to discuss today. But whether we like it or not, things will change. It does make a bit of a difference that Boris and the EU did manage to come to a trade agreement. All that trade agreement really can be condensed to is that when you import goods from the EU, there will not be a duty of customs. And when you export goods to the EU, the customs duty that is payable in Brussels will be nil. It is only, the trade agreement only basically goes down to the financial side of it. There still will be a requirement for an import declaration. There will still be a requirement for an export declaration. And hopefully we will look at those later on. But we're mainly going to look at the law, because unfortunately that is king, and the procedures governing the exportation of excise goods. So, everybody has responsibility, and these basically are yours. By definition, you are a revenue trader. If you actually go and look at the revenue traders' records and accounts regulations, they will basically say that you are defined as a revenue trader if you deal in any way with alcohol or tobacco goods. Notice it doesn't say if you deal in any way in duty-free alcohol, tobacco goods, or duty suspended or duty paid. It just says if you deal in any way. So the fact that you buy, sell, hold, transport, or do anything at all with alcohol and tobacco means that by definition you are a revenue trader. Because you are a revenue trader, you have got certain obligations when dealing with alcohol and tobacco, and those obligations are detailed in the numerous revenue and customs regulations that are passed by Parliament. For limited companies, this means that the company directors are ultimately responsible. And talking about, well, it was the little girl in the office or the little boy in the post room who dealt with that carries no weight at all. You are supposed to be carrying out management checks on your activities. Of course, if you're a sole proprietor or a partnership, then you are responsible in the same way as a company director, that it's your business, it's your requirement and obligation to comply with the law, and if you don't do it, you will be in breach of your law. It's most important to familiarise yourself with the vast number of revenue and customs notices that cover your areas of responsibility. Notice I say familiarise. I'm not expecting you to go to bed at night, and I'm not expecting you to know them by heart. But you must know where you can find the notices, and that's on the gov.uk website. And you must know that there is a notice regarding your particular topic. So if you make wine, there is notice 163 about wine. If you make spirits, notice 39. If you are a warehouse keeper, notices 196 and 197. They're all available on the gov.uk website. Please don't print them out because Revenue and Customs, thank God, have now taken the step of actually updating the notices quite regularly. And if you've got a printed notice out, you may not be looking at the most up-to-date information. So if you have a computer, set the gov.uk website to one of your favourites, and I can promise you, you will be reading the notices from time to time. Final thing, Hmrc does control businesses through periodic audits. Their starting point is always whether the law and the guidance which interprets the law has been followed. They're not interested in what you always do, what you normally do, or that's what I was told to do. They basically say, what does the law say you have to do? And if you don't comply with the law, you may be liable for any penalties in place for non-compliance. Don't want to frighten you there, but as I say, all I'm trying to get over to you is that you do have some responsibilities and you must comply with them. Well, final thing before we get into the meat of what we want to talk about today, and that is, will you know everything after today? And that is an emphatic no. Holding and movement of excise goods is a complex subject area. We are talking about many, many different types of duty. And things evolve, especially following Brexit. It's going to take some time for Revenue and Customs to actually conclude that the systems that they put in place on the 1st of January aren't really working, and they are going to have to take steps to amend those systems. So there's always it's going to be a moving target. But I'm happy to just with you any follow-up training to expand on today's discussions, and we can sort that out later on. So, first point, when are goods charged with excise duty? Well, primary law provides that for certain goods, a duty of excise is charged on production or on importation into the United Kingdom. So when the man in Scotland is still in Scotch whisky, when the person in the southwest of England is making wine, or when the person in London is distilling a gin, at the time it becomes alcohol. So in other words, at the time that the sugar is converted by yeast into alcohol, it is deemed to be an excise product, and at that time excise duty is chargeable. Now be very careful, and if you can make notes of the of the very specific language that I use. The law provides that the duty of excise is chargeable. It goes on to say that the excise duty may be suspended if immediately on production, which is what we're talking about today, but it also goes equally well for on importation, the goods are placed into an approved duty suspension regime, i.e. a tax or an excise warehouse. So we've got goods that are chargeable. We've got that charge is suspended when they're placed inside the excise warehouse. Now, we're here today to talk specifically about exports. We could spend a lot of time talking about putting goods into an excise warehouse, the obligations of warehouse keepers, obligations of owners, etc. That is not the purpose of the course today. As I say, we can cover that in future courses if that is an area that you wish to actually take on board. We're here today to talk about exports. And of course, a business or person can, of course, export any goods from the United Kingdom. The business wants to export to earn money, obviously, and the government wants businesses to export the goods to help the balance of payments, obviously. Once any goods, be they alcohol, tobacco, or widgets is normally the phrase that we normally use, which can be literally any goods, or a definition for any goods, UK law ceases to apply and the goods are not subject to UK excise duty. So in other words, once any goods get outside 12 miles of the UK coast, you are outside the territory of the United Kingdom, UK law does not apply. So for an exporter, you have a choice. You can either export the goods from an excise warehouse or a tax warehouse, or these used to be called bonded warehouses, but that phrase went out in 1993, or you can export excise goods which are UK duty paid. So what's the difference? Well, obviously, if you are exporting goods from an excise or a tax warehouse, the duty on it is chargeable, as we said on the previous slide, and it has been suspended whilst it is in the tax or the excise warehouse. That duty remains suspended until it's known as released for consumption in the United Kingdom, which is a very, very posh way of saying that the UK duty is paid on those goods, and more importantly, all other requirements are met. So in other words, the tax stamps placed on, it fully meets the requirements of the labelling requirements in the United Kingdom, etc. So the goods will either be in a tax warehouse where the duty is suspended, or they will be UK duty paid, and they will be in unapproved premises. They could even be on the shelves in Tesco's. So let's have a look. If you're exporting excise goods from a tax warehouse, first and foremost, you will either be the excise warehouse keeper, i.e. the person approved by Revenue and Customs to operate that tax warehouse. It could mean that you are the producer of the goods, you will be the winery, you will be the distiller, you will be the cider maker, you will be the cigarette manufacturer. You will be the producer of those excise goods. You will hold all the required approvals that have been given by Revenue and Customs, and you will be obliged to comply with all the conditions set out in that approval, which is given to you by Revenue and Customs. If you're going to export the goods, then obviously the duty which is suspended on the goods whilst they're in their premises, you don't want to have to pay that duty. Therefore, you will move the goods from your warehouse to the place that the goods will leave the territory of the United Kingdom, which could be the Port of Dover, Eurotunnel, Heathrow Airport, or anything like that. Those goods move under a duty suspended movement under the EMCS procedure, and it is the warehouse keeper of dispatch who has the sole responsibility for starting and completing that EMCS movement. Again, we do not today go into great details of the excise movement and control system and what it means, we can go into greater detail in further training if you wish to take that on board. In addition to and not replacing the EMCS procedures, an export declaration must be completed by the exporter and declared to Revenue and Customs via the chief system. And the two documents, that's the EMCS and the export declaration, are cross-referenced by means of the ARC, which is the unique number from the EMCS movement, and that's detailed in box 40 of the export declaration. You will note from this that the warehouse keeper and the exporter can, but are not necessarily, two different people. And one of the key things when you're exporting goods is that all parties must talk to each other. So if the exporter is a different person from the warehouse keeper, they must talk to each other. They must tell each other what they want to do, what they're doing, how they're going to do it. If you don't talk to each other, it will not end good. You will not get a seamless export. The third party that is undoubtedly going to be in the equation is the port operator. So if on a port like Dover or Harwich, Felixstowe or anywhere like that, or any of the UK airports, obviously the exporter is not allowed to actually go inside the port or the airport, so you will have a nominated person at the port or the airport who will be responsible for taking your goods off your van, off your lorry, and loading them onto the ship and loading them onto the aeroplane. These people, again, must be included. You must talk to them. Only once the goods have left the territory of the United Kingdom is it deemed that the goods have been exported. Now there is, and I apologise for this now, there is a very, very complicated procedure. It is called a departure message. And a departure message is actually given to Revenue and Customs by the port operator to say that your goods have been loaded onto the ship or the aircraft. It gives what's called an ICS code, which is a very, very, we should get away from using three-letter acronyms, but unfortunately the world is full of them. But what ICS code 60 within the customs computer systems actually says is that the goods have physically left the territory of the United Kingdom. And what that will do is through some very, very, very clever computer workings, the Customs and Excise talks to the Excise Movement and Control system, matches the details between your duty suspended movement and your export declaration, and basically sends a report of export back to the dispatching warehouse keeper, discharging the movement, basically confirming that the goods have left the territory of the United Kingdom. It sounds exceptionally complicated. I do apologise. I have had to simplify this in great detail, otherwise we would have spent all day talking about just this one area. But it happens very, very quickly, provided that the warehouse keeper of dispatch, the exporter, and the person at the port who is acting for both of you in loading the goods all talk to each other. It's not an easy thing to do for people to talk to each other, because it's a case of, I've never done that before, but it's something that you are going to have to do. However, if the goods are UK duty paid, i.e. you bought them from a business within the United Kingdom who has actually paid the UK duty on it, whether that's an independent business or even Tesco's, you can still export the goods. Obviously, if you are exporting the goods that are UK duty paid, there will be a considerable uplift in the cost of those goods to take into account the UK duty. What the United Kingdom has in place is what's called drawback procedures, which are specific procedures that allow goods that are exported from the United Kingdom to have the previously paid UK excise duty repaid to them, or you draw it back. And there are specific procedures detailed in the Excise Notice 207. I will warn you now that these are simple procedures, but if they are not followed to the letter, it is normal practice for Revenue and Customs to refuse repayment of the duty. They are very, very, very strict on businesses following the drawback procedures as detailed in the notice, not varied in the slightest. In very, very short terms, you complete an application form to draw back the duty. You send that application form to Revenue and Customs at least 14 days before you intend to export the goods. That 14 days gives Revenue and Customs time, if they wish, if they have the willpower, to actually visit your premises and examine the goods that you intend to export. They will be checking for, obviously, that the UK duty stamps have been removed and that they are declared as on the application form that you've made. You will then be required to follow the UK export documentation procedures, just as we've detailed for goods that are being removed from an excise warehouse. And only once the UK export procedures have been fully completed and you hold evidence that the goods have physically left the territory of the United Kingdom, will Revenue and Customs consider removing the goods from their records and giving you the duty back. So, what do you do? First, obviously, you are going to sell goods to somebody in the EU27. Most importantly, talk to them. You can take it from me that importers in the EU, be that France, Germany or whether, are going to be as equally worried as you are in how are we going to get the goods into the EU. They're going to be as confused as you are. They are going to be immensely happy if you can talk to them and you are confident as to what is expected. In other words, again, talk to them on the telephone. You may or may not have heard the term Incoterm before. If you haven't, then I suggest first instance is actually Google it and see what it says. But basically, Incoterms means the agreement governing the sale between all parties. So in other words, if you're selling some goods to a person in France, the Incoterm will set out how the sale is made, when payment is made, at what time, who is responsible for the goods whilst they're in the United Kingdom, who's responsible for the goods when they get to France, Germany or wherever. That's known as the Incoterm. So in other words, discuss with the importer in the EU what Incoterm you're going to use. That Incoterm will, of course, set out who's going to complete the export declaration in the United Kingdom. More importantly, who's going to complete the EU import declaration, etc., when the goods arrive in France. So both parties, the importer and the exporter, need to solve, discuss, and more importantly, agree what the Incoterms are. From your point of view, in the short term at least, you should have obtained the services of a UK customs agent who's going to complete the export declaration in the UK on behalf of the exporter. Again, talk to them. Again, instruct them in writing. So tell them what you want, but make sure you do it in writing. Tell them that you're exporting goods from your premises at A to a place in France, that you want them to undertake the export declaration for them, that you're going to export the goods, they're going to be duty suspended or they're going to be duty paid. Tell them what the Incoterm is. If it is a competent customs agent, he will know what you're talking about and he will guide you in this process to make sure that your declaration is correct. If when you're talking to your customs agent, you are in any way, shape or form concerned that he doesn't seem to be understanding what you're asking of him, choose a different customs agent. It's like buying a car. You don't go to the garage, any garage, and buy the first car. You shop around. shop around for your customs agent, it's exactly the same. Once you've got all that in place, the EMCS goods are moved from your warehouse in duty suspension to the port, cross-referenced to the export declaration via the ARC, and in line with your instructions, the customs agent will complete all the requirements of the goods at the port, and you will receive a report of export detailing the goods have left the territory of the United Kingdom when the goods have been finally exported. So, discharge of the movement. Obviously, when we're talking about goods in duty suspension, the main thing that Revenue and Customs are concerned about is that the goods go missing between your warehouse and the port. That is why EMCS movement procedures are in place. And as part of those EMCS movement procedures, there is a guarantee in place that the person who gives that guarantee will pay any duty on any goods that go missing or are in any way subject to an irregularity between the premises from which they're removed to the port or airport. That guarantee is only discharged once the export declaration confirms that the goods have physically left the territory of the United Kingdom, and this is more importantly, the dispatching warehouse keeper has received the report of export. The dispatching warehouse keeper will only receive a report of export if the EMCS movement and the details on the export declaration are the same, and more importantly, that the agent of the port has actually complied with all the requirements of Revenue and Customs. So, for example, if Revenue and Customs decide to examine the goods at the port prior to export, and your agent doesn't actually produce the goods to Revenue and Customs and instead puts them straight on board the ship or the aircraft, which sails, even though the goods may have left the territory of the United Kingdom, because the agents at the port failed to comply with Revenue and Customs requirements, they will not be deemed to have physically left the territory of the UK. Customs will say, we chose to examine the goods, you didn't bring them, I'm sorry, we're not going to say that the goods have been exported. So again, it's very important that you choose a good intermediary who's going to act on your behalf at the port. And again, warehouse keepers must check for undischarged movements on a regular basis and make sure that there are no goods outstanding in their records. Basically, what I'm trying to say by this point is that there is a regulation, that's Regulation 5 of the Excise Goods Holding Movement and Duty Point Regulations, which says that there is an excise duty point at the time when the goods are released for consumption in the United Kingdom. So if your goods on the journey from your warehouse in, say, Hereford to the port of Southampton go missing, they basically get stolen, then Revenue and Customs would like the duty on those goods. The fact that you were not involved in the theft or you have suffered financially from the theft makes absolutely no difference. The duty is due on those goods, and the person who is liable to pay the duty is the person who provided the guarantee for that movement. So you have to be very, very careful. And here we go. Just to ramp that up, because it is important, an excise good is released for consumption, a regular or irregular departure from duty suspension. So a regular means when the warehouse keeper pays the duty and removes the goods from your warehouse. That's a regular movement. An irregular departure means anything else. If anybody is deemed to be holding excise goods outside a duty suspension range. So in other words, if you've got excise goods in your garage and your garage hasn't been approved by Revenue and Customs in an excise warehouse, those goods have passed an excise duty point. obviously if you produce excise goods outside a duty suspension arrangement. And the final one only refers to imports. We're not discussing imports today. We'll keep it on the slide, but we'll move over that. So for exports, literally, we're only interested in the first point up there. If the goods fail to physically leave the territory of the UK, then it is an irregular departure from the duty suspension regime. One thing I would like to clarify there, it says if the goods fail to physically leave the territory of the United Kingdom. No, notice it says the goods. It doesn't say any goods. So what we're talking about here is that the goods that you have declared for export on your EMCS movement and on the excise declaration, it's those actual goods, not similar goods, not replacement goods. It's those actual goods that have to physically leave the territory of the United Kingdom. Again, it sounds complicated, it sounds frightening. It isn't, provided that the warehouse keeper or duty suspended goods or the exporter and the customs agent and the port operator all understand each other's requirements, each other's obligations, and talk to each other. So, from the 1st of November, it being a condition of approval of basically any revenue trader to actually have what's called due diligence. Now, whether we like it or not, alcohol and tobacco is subject to a lot of criminal activities. And what you don't want to do is become involved in this area. So, you should objectively assess the risks of alcohol fraud duty and have checks in place to reasonably identify certain transactions that may or may not, in your opinion, not seem quite right. We'll move on to the next slide, and have procedures in place. If you are approached by somebody, if you're a warehouse keeper or a producer and you're approached by somebody who says, I'd like to export some of your cider to Spain. First thing you say is, do I know this person? What do I know about him? Why is he wanting to take my cider to Spain? Is there a market for my cider in Spain in the quantities that he's discussing? So in other words, do not be fooled by somebody picking up the telephone and making you an offer that, well, quote, looks like it's too good to be true, because the chances are it is too good to be true. So due diligence places an onus on you as the warehouse keeper and you as the exporter of those goods to actually do not jump in both feet. If somebody says, we'd like to export some of your goods, you've got to start asking questions. Do I know him? Why does he want my goods? Does this seem too good to be true? How is he going to move them? What is he going to do? You've got to ask yourself hundreds of questions. And only when you are satisfied with the answers that you get to all of those questions should you go ahead with the export. If you've got any doubts, you should not go into this sale on the grounds of it could, and I use the word wisely, could place you in the position that you would be liable for the UK duty if those goods are illegally or irregularly released for consumption. Basically, use your business nous. Talk to him. So, the warehouse keeper of dispatch is responsible for legally placing the goods into a duty-suspended movement for the journey from the warehouse to the port. The exporter of the goods may or may not be the same person as the warehouse keeper. The exporter is responsible for declaring the goods to Hmrc at export, and the information on the EMCS document and the export document must be the same, and therefore the warehouse keeper and exporter, if different, must always talk and trust each other. And if that trust fails, then the warehouse keeper should not remove the goods from the warehouse. You will notice there that we haven't included anything at all with regards to the obligations of the importer within the EU. Again, that is because this is not what this webinar is all about. We can, I'm more than happy to, extend and provide further training on what is the requirement within the territory of the EU, but you'll have to come back later on that if that is something that you need. So there you go. The EU importer will be responsible for all of the EU import declaration procedures. The importer will be liable for the excise duty in the member state of importation unless the goods are immediately placed into an excise duty suspension regime within the EU. Are they aware of this? My spelling's bad, it's our. Wrong word, that. Again, this is where the Incoterm agreed comes in. You will agree that who is responsible for the action within the EU. And the UK warehouse keeper of dispatch and the exporter have no responsibilities when the goods are inside the EU unless the Incoterm agreed has provided for such. Therefore, it's very, very, very careful that you do not put yourself in the position of being responsible for any procedure or obligation within the EU that you are physically unable to undertake. I mean, you know, a UK exporter will not be allowed to access the French customs system to make an EU import declaration. The French will not allow him access to their computer systems. Therefore, the Incoterm has to be one that provides that the importer makes access and provides the import declaration. That is an exceptionally short and an exceptional overview of exporting goods from the United Kingdom. As I say, it is an overview. Further training can be given by myself into the specific areas of your business because all businesses are different. They all export goods slightly different ways. They've all got slightly different nuances as how goods move, etc., etc. If you would like to take this up, we can discuss that after this, or you can contact Hillary or anyone in the DCI and they can put you in contact with me. The only thing that I would add before I finish is that exporting would appear at the outset to be fraught with difficulties and to be very complicated. I would agree that the first couple of occasions when you're exporting goods, you may be stressed, you may be worried. However, the procedures as we've described are actually quite simple. They are procedures that are already always in use within the United Kingdom. You know, if you're exporting goods to Switzerland, these are the procedures that you follow. So there are a lot of customs agents, all the people at the ports are all fully aware of what is required of you when exporting goods. So therefore, you are not alone. I now complete. Thank you for listening for me, for droning on for nearly 3/4 of an hour. Thank you very much indeed. We may speak at the end when we're going into the question and answering session.
Thank you very much, Neil. Some of Hillary's customers may have seen you before a few years ago, and once again, thank you for the update and the useful information. We now have Ian from SGS, which is based in Somerset. They have specialised in international trade software for over 30 years and offer some of the most up-to-date solutions in the market. Ian James joined the company in 2019 after graduating in business information technology and now leads a growing team and increasing customer portfolio of UK manufacturers from all industry types, including food and beverages. Now I'd like to pass over to you, Ian.
Great, thanks Mark for that handover. Also thanks to Neil for setting the scene there. How to navigate customs in the theoretical and making sure you're compliant. So as Mark introduced there, my name's Ian James. I'm Business Development Manager here at SGS in the United Kingdom. I'm specifically in the e-customs services area. Before we start, I just wanted to thank Hillary for the invitation to present today. I've known Hillary for a good number of years, and also the team at UKTI Southwest. And if anyone hasn't already, I can endorse, because I've personally used their services. I undertook a trade mission a few years back, the days when we were allowed to travel. So I can endorse that. You know, it was a great trip for myself, and there was great support available. So reach out if you do need that. We remain in I still feel, a period of change. Since the end of the year, we're still receiving notifications out of Hmrc, and there's still interpretation to make of how that applies. So just ask for that support if you need it. Another nod before I start my presentation. You might be aware of a team. I think they're based in the same location as UKTI, at the Bristol Chamber of Commerce. You might also know them as Business West. I thought it was relevant to mention them today, as they recently launched a customs declaration service. So if, after seeing the demonstration, which I'm going to show you in a second, you're discouraged from performing these yourself, and you do need someone to perform them for you, then there is a team available locally. Slight incentive for myself is that they do use our software to deliver that, so there's a nice tie-in there. And if either they can't support you, and I'm not sure on capacities, so there's a lot of activity across the country in that area at the moment, then SGS have their own team internally as well to perform customs declarations. So you've got options there if it's not something that you can take on yourself. So my presentation today is going to be a live customs declaration. So using the theory that Neil's given us, but looking a little bit more at the data elements that are submitted and what a customs declaration actually looks like. So if I just share my screen with you, give me 1 second. So hopefully on your side, and someone jump in if that's not come through, but it's saying on my side that that's sharing the screen. So
yeah, we can all see it.
Perfect. Thanks for confirming that, Mark. So on here, I've loaded up our SGS website, although it is a sub-site of sgs.com, specialising in international trade. If you struggle to find this at all, if you want to look this up after the training today, after the session, if you search for SGS Shepton Mallet as our office location, you hopefully should find that. If you end up at sgs.com, you will find lots of other information, but there's not too much of a highlight on our piece. SGS are a global organisation, and they offer many services. So it's buried in there, but there's a quicker way of getting to it if you find our office and find our website. So the declaration I'm going to show you today is a live customs export declaration via the Hmrc Chief system. I'm showing you kind of a typical declaration for alcoholic beverages. If anyone is trading with Northern Ireland, the situation is slightly different. So maybe add that into the questions if someone specifically wants to cover that. we could either answer it at the time, or maybe we need to take it offline. So this example is mainly working for mainland Europe. Please, I just need a slight mention. Don't take the data that I use as specific guidance for your business. There's Hmrc documentation available that explains the boxes on a customs declaration. I just would encourage you to read those, or come back to me and ask afterwards if it's something you're not sure about. Now, you, as Neil covered in his presentation regarding the EMCS service, which was in existence for trade with the EU for many years gone by, while we were still part of the EU. So you're likely, if you're already trading, registered on EMCS and be using it to raise ARCs. Typically, it's the responsibility of the warehouse keeper to raise those rather than outsource it. So I want to mention that as the EMCS service is an example of a Hmrc portal that they put together to deliver a service to traders to perform those declarations. Now, if you use it directly via Hmrc, then you're probably aware that it's reasonably basic service, perfectly functional, and you may find that you have to retype information on each declaration. The same can be achieved by logging on to Chief, the Hmrc Chief service, and you can perform customs declarations direct on there. The Chief system is older than EMCS. It's more basic. I don't think it even supports the mouse. I think it's completely keyboard-based, and it's a code-based navigation system. But there's a service there if you wanted to go via that route. The alternative is to look at software from commercial providers such as ourselves. And I'll present to you. You can make your own judgment as to which way you want to go and what works for you. In third-party software, you hopefully observe there are some additional features. So copying declarations, having profiles, templates, and for higher volume users, there's the option to integrate. So where you put an order through on Sage, Dynamics, Navision, SAP, wherever you are with your business and how you manage your orders and your production, that data can be output and used to perform the EMCS and the customs declaration. So we can go to that level if you needed it. All right, enough of the introduction. Let's show you what I actually mean. So I'm on the i2i.sgs.com website, the subsite of SGS, and you can find information on here about the software that I'm going to show you today. Two main pieces, eConsign and eGTA. And there's even a sign-up option on there if you wish. The way to navigate through, once you have signed up, I'm already logged in at the moment, you go through to customer login in the top right. That takes you to a services page. We initially give you a breakdown of the availability of custom services. So we want to show you what the services are running. So we have a way there of if there's downtime, if we're not getting responses back, we can reflect that. And if I scroll down slightly, eConsign is available as a service. And if I click on Start, it takes you through to my eConsign account. If you do go this far, have a look on this first section, because when you first create an account, it's unticked that you trade internationally and you trade in excise goods, but just 2 ticks, and that enables the customs declarations and the EMCS. And they're both separate. You don't have to do them both in the same software. Show you, as Neil mentioned, about how to link them together, because that bit is crucial. But you don't have to do it in the software. So we've logged in, we've accessed the software, support options available for you. There's a live chat button just there in the top right hand corner. So by all means, click on that, and you can type a message in to one of our agents. We can get back to you live and try and support you with whatever your question is. If I navigate through to shipments, on my list I have previous shipments showing in the list. There's a column that shows you a reference, so an internal reference that you know that shipment by, a description, so I've used an account number and then the week number and the year. Yeah, I'm still working in last year. I should have updated that. A breakdown of the documents that I have against that shipment, a status, action, and last edit date. So if we go into this, I've chosen a typical shipment set of documents, but this is completely variable to suit your business. So you don't have to raise all of these, but if you need it, there's an invoice, there's a packing list. There's also certified documents in here if you need to prove origin for the import into the overseas country. But focus for today was the export declaration, which the tab, although when you select the document, it is called a customs export declaration, but the tab is the SADX. And this is what a customs declaration actually looks like. So if I scroll down, just give you a view of this. Now, back along, Neil might remember this from his days in customs. There used to be paper export declarations, which was referred to as a C88 or as a SAD, single administrative document. So the design of the screen in the eConsign software is based around what used to be the paper export declaration. So the boxes are numbered, and you see the little small numbers against them. Anything with a plus, you can have a profile, and not all boxes are mandatory. So there's data on here that I don't need to complete. So if you get this far yourself, don't feel that you have to fill in every box. A lot of them are optional or conditional. So based on the commodity code, validation will run and will guide you as to the data elements that you need. That will either be in our software, or if our validation passes, Hmrc might give you a rejection to ask for additional information. Not necessarily a bad thing, because you can just correct it, resend it, and hopefully that will then go through. So if we work through the boxes, we'll just work top down. So I've got a profile for my exporter. So my name, address, and EORI number. Below that, I have the consignee. So in this example, I've chosen Spain as the country of destination. Towards the right-hand side, I've selected that it's an export, and I've selected that it's a full declaration. I've entered my reference number and a total number of packs. So based on the example order that I'm putting through, it's 3 pallets of craft beer was the product I chose. Scroll down slightly. we have filled in the country of dispatch as GB and the country of destination as ES. All of these have drop-down boxes against them, so you don't need to know that it's ES or IT for Italy. You don't need to know that list. You can search for it just by the country name. I was requested to fill in the identity of the transport and the nationality. So actually, it should be, just go down to GB. Which is at the top, obviously. It's there. A port code, and against that one we've got a little lookup. So if you're unsure of the port codes, you can find those out. And then slightly further down we have our item. And there's a little pop out on the side. Once you get familiar with the way the software works, this should be fairly easy to navigate. But I'll just point that out to you. That there's a little pop out on the side, and that shows us the lines that I have declared on this declaration. Now I have preset this one up because I thought that would be easier and quicker to go through, allow us either more time for questions or a bit more time back in our day. So I've pre-populated this one, but I'll take you through it. Against this section, Hmrc don't require you to type in the lines from your invoice. So if you have beers that have different brand names, you don't need to replicate each one of those from your invoice with a quantity and a value and a commodity code, etc. You can group them together if they are the same commodity code and the same procedure code, which for beer, I think we're going to be pretty standard on that. So even though I've got 3 pallets and they're 3 different products on my invoice, I've grouped together. If we go into edit, we have description. It's line number 1. We've got a commodity code, again with a lookup. You can find those if you're not familiar with those. Having likely not needed them or trade with the EU before the start of the year, then there's a lookup for those. I've entered what's called a procedure code. So the type of trade, there's a specific code for excise goods. So I've entered that one there. Plus the origin is GB. A weight in kilograms, net and gross. A supplementary quantity, which you can look up in the tariff, what the quantities are. A statistical value. So the value always in sterling. So convert that one back if you're selling in euros, perhaps. Additionally, we then have some sub-boxes to the item. So that's the basic details. So we can compact that one and then move to the next section. Again, labelled by the box number. So box 31 on the customs declaration is the package type. So I've used the description as addressed. So a bit of a shortcut if you label the pallets in this example with the address of the consignee. The total number, and if they're all the same type, you can just group them together. And then again, the codes, there's a whole long list, but I've used PX as a pallet. If you had a different type package, you could just add a new line. So you can have multiple packages under the same declaration. You don't need to separate those out. They could all go under one. Next section is called box 40. You might recall Neil mentioned this, and this is the key to tying together your ARC from your ENCS declaration to your export declaration. So I didn't have a live ARC number. So I absolutely accept that's a sort of dummy ARC in there.
Ian, just a quick one. I know we're doing questions at the end, but just one that popped in that I just want to address now, which is what drop down do we put for the Channel Islands?
Yeah. Okay. So you're just seeing if it was in the list. No. It's a good question. We definitely do it. I'll get the answer to that and answer it at the Q&A at the end.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll either take the question at the end, or we'll get back to you after this event.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'm just not confident enough to say it, but we have lots of beer going out to. I don't know if any of you trade with them as well. Is it Victor Hugo out in the Channel Islands? Takes a lot of alcohol. So I'll look up a declaration in a second and just double check that. So just finish off on box 40. That's where you would put your ARC. 380 is not quite the right code. That is meant to be for an invoice. But like I say, I didn't have a live ARC to pop in there. So there's a slight variation to how you would do it. That's the way to tie together, and it's really important, the customs declaration with the EMCS. And the last thing that I needed on this particular declaration was to declare the what's called the third quantity. So it's an item level declaration, it's an AI statement, no, it's a third quantity, and against there you can fill in the number of litres of alcohol against there. So you have some standard options there. AI statements generally is around licensing. Documents would be different document codes. So if maybe you're claiming that your goods are organic, you might need a certificate to say that the goods are organic, and that's where you would declare the reference from that certificate. Third quantity would be things like the alcohol content. Supervising office is a customs office where you can declare the address. UNDG would be for dangerous transport, and transport charges is a method of payment code. I'm not going to dwell on those. Most of them are very rarely used. So once we get that far, I can save away that item. I could repeat that if I had multiple commodity codes to add on the declaration. They can all go through on one if they go into the same a consignee in the EU and they're going on the same transport. And if I then scroll back up to the top, this is another area that I just want to highlight. If you get as far and then aren't sure how to submit it, this section here, this little white panel where it says click to expand, drop that one down, and in here you will plug your Hmrc credentials, so the ones issued to you to access Chief, and this is a free badge that you can ask for from Hmrc to give you access to Chief. I've selected the the Chief service as training, so you can simulate a live declaration, but in a training mode. So we will receive a live response back from Chief, but they won't expect the goods to arrive at the port. So it's a great tool to practice. So even if you don't take these on yourself straight away, it's something that you can replicate for your own orders, your own goods, your own customers, and then take that service over. So there's just a drop down there to change it to live. And when you're ready, And I'm also selecting here the declaration type. So full dec as the declaration type that I'm going to use to submit these goods. There's a button to pre-validate, so we'll run that one first. It's come back as no validation issues. So I mentioned earlier, we do have validation in the software. If I'd missed off anything that was mandatory, at that point the Excise system would have prompted us. We can go back and we can fill something in that we'd missed out. However, it's not guaranteed acceptance once we pass that validation and we submit it, because Hmrc will run their own validation based on your business, their goods, their destination, etc. So we might still get a rejection. And then there's a button to click. So we click send. It confirms we're sending it in training mode. So really want to reiterate, your goods won't get accepted at port if you get an accepted training declaration, which has happened. People have tried that by mistake. Click on yes. And there was a panel there that said not declared, and it's changed now to awaiting reply. So we're going to wait for that one to come back and see what happens. While we're waiting for that, it'll hopefully take about 2 minutes. That's roughly the kind of response time from Chief for export declarations by the time they've gone through and come back. I think I saw a question come in about how to get your badge. So if I just tackle that while we're just waiting for that response to turn around. So what you need to do is go to your browser and search for Hmrc PA7. And it will come back and it will say, ask for access to Chief through WEX channels. So go to that link and there's a form that you complete that will ask, request trader access to Chief. And what they mean by WEX is web, email, and XML. Now, web is, as I mentioned, the free service that Hmrc provide for you to log on to Chief and enter your own declaration straight in. It's the keyboard-based system. It's pretty old, but it's functional. Email and XML are the methods of communication that third-party software use. So when you register for your Chief access, when you complete the PA7 form, you can tick all three if you wish. You're just selecting which routes you will use. The eConsign software specifically uses the email route, and the GTA software is kind of the next level up that we have. Has the option to use email or XML, but if you had email, you'd be perfectly fine in both. So if you scroll down slightly, there is a link to the form. There is the form. This is where the form is. Oh, right. This page is original because it's out of date. How interesting. Well, that's thrown a curveball. Inactive form. I've got a copy of it, so I can send it out by email. Yeah, right. Maybe there's a new link. Okay, fine. There's a new link since last week. Yeah, it looks like they've broken it out into the 3 different declaration types. Yeah, fine. There's a link there. If you follow it through from the PA7 form, you are redirected to that page. I've gone through the options there. So basically the process is you fill in your request, you send it off to a team called Chief Operations. They take your IORI, register you on Chief, and they give you back credentials, which if I flick back now to the eConsign software, there, they could give you credentials which look like this, which you plug into the software. So I personally, I don't know what everyone else's experience was, I personally found it really difficult to find that advice from the material that was published by Hmrc. So they told us all that we needed to make declarations, but it wasn't very forthcoming of how to get access to Chief, I didn't think. So I'm not surprised that people have that question. Once you've got it, you just plug them in here. This is a free badge from Hmrc, there's no charge for it. Plug it in and you can submit declarations. And that one's come back accepted while I've been waffling on and looking for the new form. I do also want to mention there is a charge point in our software. So although that badge for exports is absolutely free, you just get that from Hmrc, there is a charge once you set our service to live. Now it's about £2 a declaration. So it can be a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on how many credits you buy. So the more you purchase, the cheaper they get. So you purchase those via our shop. You draw down on them then as you submit declarations. But you can look at it as about £2 per declaration for the export. We don't charge for the training ones. So again, another incentive for you just to have a go and just see how you get on, because that one's gone through with no charge. Once you get that back, you can so at this point, again, Neil touched on this when he talked about the port arriving your goods, and you eventually getting back an ICS code and a departure message. Now, in this training scenario, because goods are never going to arrive at the port, but in a live scenario, we would expect the arrived and the departed dates and the ICS codes to begin to be filled in. You get that response back into the software if you forward us a copy of the report. And I opened one when Neil talked about it because I wanted to show you what one looks like. So if you can see that on your screen, I'll just flick to a different tab. This is what an export departure advice looks like. So there's the ICS code that Neil talked about, 60. And we've got a route allocated, and it's a DTI S8. And that is the ultimate evidence that you can get as a business that you no longer owe the VAT those goods, because they have been confirmed to have been exported to an overseas market. So really key thing to look out for. On your application, when you apply for your badge, one of the questions on there is to ask you where you would like what the terminology I think on the form is chief reports to be sent. They mean forms like this, and there are a range of them that come back out of chief. This is just one example. But yeah, look out for those. You can also get them back from your agent if they're performing declarations on your behalf. They will be getting a copy of it, but it goes to the declarant rather than to the trader. But you can ask for that to be sent on to you. So this one came back accepted, so that was all good. If it came back rejected, there is an option to open the rejected reason, which is that button there. And that will give you in plain text why the declaration was rejected. I did a couple of declarations before we joined the session today. Things like I'd missed off the third quantity, so it told me to go and correct that. I'd used an invalid combination of port and transport method, so it validated me on that. So there was guidance there if you do get rejections. And you can always go through to our help desk team if you have questions about that. So if we pop back out of here, we can close that one down. That one's done. What we would do at that point would be give a copy of the declaration to the transport company. You might have heard of systems, other government systems, which link together the declarations with the transport. So you've got your Kent Access Pass, and you've got a service called GVMS. GVMS, I don't think, is coming online and for all freight until the next phase in 1st of July, unless you're trading with Northern Ireland, and then I think it's in operation now. But it's a good thing once you've got a declaration cleared, which we've got a green flag on it to say it's been accepted, give a copy of that declaration to the transport company. You don't want them performing a duplicate declaration, and they might need to link your freight together with other freight they're carrying on the vehicle. Other just points of note that I just wanted to refer to. We've got other sources of information, if you haven't found them already. Got again, you can just search for these online. Hmrc Tariff Volume 3. And if you follow that through, there are two versions of it at the moment. There's one for CDS, that's the new customs system, which is mainly for Northern Irish trade. And you've got a chief version, which is the current version, the one that I'm showing you the declaration for today. And if you scroll down in there, it's a great long document. It's on Neil's advice, I agree with him. Don't print it off. It's subject to change, and it's huge. But if you scroll down, I think it's section 11, there's a completion guide which goes through box by box on how to complete an export declaration. So that's a good source of advice, of guidance. And you might also need to look up the Hmrc Tariff Volume 2. And in that version, you would search for your goods or your commodity code, whichever you know, and you can find specific advice for the export of those goods and the requirements of the data on those declarations in the Tariff Volume 2. The PA7 form is to register for your chief access. Looks like it might have changed as of late last week, but you can still find your way through from that form. In addition to the customs declaration, you might be asked, you might hear a reference to something called transit, or T1, or NCTS. It's all the same thing. So where at the moment the new requirements are for an EMCS to the port and a customs declaration linked together for the export. To get into France, if you're going via the typical sort of Dover-Calais type route, you might need to prove evidence either of an import into France, if that's the destination, or some way that the French Customs Authority will be satisfied that the customs debt, the duty, the liability for the debt on your trade is covered while it passes through France. So a lot of the customs guidance, if you have seen any of the presentations by French Customs, they talk about it, is around having a T1 transit movement, which gives you gives them security that the goods have a destination outside of France and that the debt is covered while it's passing through France. Hence, transit is what's transiting through that country. So keep an eye out for that. It's something that your transport company can potentially provide. They maybe just doing it as a matter of course. You may see a charge for it potentially. You can apply for these yourself. It's not available in e-consign as I've showed you today, but we have a separate piece of software that allows you to do transit. So if you want to look at that, bear that in mind, we'll come back to us. The other benefit transit is that it takes the customs formalities away from the border. So although customs at Dover and at Calais are very interested whether you have it, the commencement of the transit is generally at an inland location away from the port. So you don't join the same queue, potentially. You follow a green lane because you have already commenced your customs formalities from an authorised consignor location in the UK to an authorised consignee location in the EU. And they're generally not at the ports, they're inland. So there's a benefit there to having that. Now, before I go any further, I just wanted to give a nod to our other piece of software in case it sparks anyone's greater interest. I've already logged into it if it's still working. Yeah. So I just had it open in another tab. It's a product called GTA. When I come to how we can help, I'll tell you kind of the difference between the two in terms of cost. GTA also gives you imports. Now, it's not typically a great need if you're a kind of beverage producer, in that your goods are potentially made out of locally sourced products, or you're buying them from a supplier in the UK if they're not. If you are an importer, I guess one example might be raw spirit. If you're bringing that in from the EU before it's transformed into sort of a more like gin product, then you could be responsible for the import of those goods. So there's import declarations in GTA which we don't have in e-consign. So that's one of the main differences. Other than that, the layout is slightly different. So the user interface is a bit more developed, it's a bit more functional, and under stored data, we have a greater level of profiles that you can set up for your products and your customers. So there's a whole long list under there, greater than you have under eConsign, which is slightly more basic. So both are available, both are there. We can talk about that if you want to know more. So I just wanted to cover how SGS can help. I've 100% covered our software. Declaration service, if you want to do it on your behalf, if you're not ready yet, or if it's something you haven't got time to do as well, and guidance. So just knowing where to go to find the relevant information, we can just point in the right direction. The eConsign software is pay as you go. It's absolutely free to register, set up, to trial with. You just pay when you want to send a live declaration, about £2. For GTA, currently, there's grant funding available that will fund the first year. So there's actually no charge to you. It's 100% funded if you wanted to go down that route. And then after year one, you'd be asked whether you would like to renew your subscription. And though there's an annual charge for it, which covers for access, the maintenance, the support, and your usage, it's between about £1 and £5 per declaration. But it does vary how many you do. And I think that covers what I wanted to show you today. So at that point, I think I will hand back to Mark and see what questions have come in.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Ian. So we've had a few questions come into the chat. Now, if anyone has got any more questions, please put them into the chat function. Either direct them to me at DITSW Events or to everyone, and I will read out for Ian and Neil to answer. Maybe, as long as they know. We obviously don't know everything, but we will try our best. So, can a HM4 form still be used for duty-paid goods leaving the UK?
No.
That was a really easy answer. Thank you, Neil.
No, I can't just leave it with a no. HM4 is used for importing duty-paid goods into the UK. Following the 1st of January, the UK, as we all know, left the EU. Therefore, any goods that are duty paid in France, Germany, or any of the 27 other remaining EU states, the UK does not accept or acknowledge. So there is basically, the UK is not interested that the goods are duty paid in France. If you want to import French duty paid goods, then they're treated exactly the same way as importing any other wine or alcohol or tobacco. They're subject to an import declaration. And as we said on the slide I produced, excise duty is chargeable at importation into the United Kingdom, and on the import declaration that you will make before the goods leave France, you will advise Revenue and Customs what is your intention with those goods via the CPC code. That's the Customs Procedure Code that you will detail in box 37 of your import declaration. And you'll either tell Revenue and Customs that you intend to pay the duty at the time of importation, in which case you will get your import declaration will account for the excise duty and the import. There is no customs duty because of the trade agreement, that's nil. Or you can suggest that you wish to suspend the excise duty by placing it into an excise warehouse. There is one problem, however. Last week I was in negotiation with my old colleagues in Hmrc, as I believe the system that's now detailed in the new Public Notice 204B is illegal. And as such, what Revenue and Customs have actually said is that the HM4 system is still in place. You've got to account for the UK duty before you import the goods into the UK. But unfortunately, as soon as you make your import declaration, you're going to have to be paying the excise duty again. So I think that Revenue and Customs have introduced a double payment scheme. And at the moment, they're looking at the HM4 scheme as a whole. So I would expect the Notice 204B to be redacted and changed in short order. But no, to cover a long answer very shortly, no, the HM4 scheme is only used for importing goods into the UK, and it is currently under review.
Thank you, Neil. So also, where can we find competent custom agents?
Stick your finger in the air and see which way the wind's blowing, is my short answer to that. Basically, one, reference by other people is normally very good. Two, go online and find one purely online, ring them up and talk to them. Ask them various questions, such as the ones that I suggested earlier on. Ask them, do they want instructions in writing? Ask them, are they capable of completing all types of declaration? Ask them, do they understand what customs procedure codes are? If they fill you with confidence with their answers, you're in as good a position as anybody else. If you get the gut feeling that they haven't got a clue what they're talking about, don't use them. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah,
It's a register of good people or bad people. It's all down to how you find dealing with this one company. Some businesses are thought of as being competent by one person. Another person will think of them as being totally incompetent. So it's literally just talking to them, and do they fill you with confidence?
Thank you. Ian, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there is a list of customs agents, brokers on the Hmrc website. They're not vetted anyway, they are just listed. I observed that that list used to be quite short and is now very long. So there's been lots of new entrants into that marketplace. So I endorse absolutely what Neil is sort of saying to do there. One thing you could try, if you go on to Companies House, you can search for an organization and see when it was incorporated. So you could actually verify that how long that business has been trading, and even at a basic level, just check them out. And I suppose slight vested interest in my side. We are a customs agent, so if you're interested in finding out more about our service, you could talk to us.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matthew. So we've got quite a few questions, so we are going to keep the answers as short as possible. Sorry, both of you. Could you confirm what paperwork is required by the transportation company to take to port? I believe there is 5 or 6 pieces of paperwork, and if any of these are missing, the shipment will be held. Listed so far: invoice, picking list, health and security, country of origin, export declaration, etc.
If you are moving the goods from a tax or an excise warehouse in duty suspension, you will need a copy of the excise accompanying document as provided by the warehouse keeper of dispatch, which details the ARC, the Administrative Reference Code number, which is the unique number for that movement, or you need any commercial documents on which the ARC is prominently displayed. If you get stopped during the journey from the warehouse to the port and you say, I've got excise goods on board, the first question that a policeman or a border force officer will say is, can I see the ARC, please? And if you can't provide it to him, you will not be allowed to proceed. So the document with the ARC is the key reference number that you need to carry on either a copy of the EAD or a normal commercial document, the delivery note, etc., etc., but the ARC must be prominently displayed on it. I will warn you that the police and border force can then access the EMCS system by using the ARC, and that will tell them what goods are covered by that ARC. If those goods are different from what the goods that are on your vehicle, you are in the fertilizer. So please be careful.
Yeah, and just from my side, I just want to add that we're copied into a daily call at the moment in regard to Hmrc service availability and operations at the port. I think last week, between a quarter and a third of vehicles were turned back for the wrong paperwork. So it is really key to make sure that is all in place. In addition to that list and exactly what Neil said, I would just add making sure that the Overseas Customs Authority will let you in. So you either need your transit or your import in the EU, because they're not going to let you disappear into the EU until they're sure that the duty is covered.
Which is why we said on the thing, you've got to talk to your importer about the Incoterm. Who is be responsible for taking all the customs paperwork responsibilities in the EU?
Yeah.
I suggest a conversation with the person wishing to purchase your goods is a good starting point. And the second point I say is, there are going to be times and occasions when the UK exporter will not be able to access the French, the German, the Belgian customs systems to actually produce the EU import declaration or any other documentation. So therefore, a prior discussion with the importer as to who is going to undertake what obligation is vital.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we've also got, aware that this is to do with export, but info on the changes to import process would be very useful. TRC is no longer available. Applicable.
If you've got another hour, I would be more than happy to. I don't think I could cover imports and give it any justice in a question and answer session. If the person who is asking that question could via you email me, I'm more than happy to take it up with them. It's, if you like, it's the reverse, but completely the same, but it's not something that I really do.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would actually, sorry, Mark, I would argue that it is more difficult. Currently, though, businesses have an easement for the first 6 months. It does depend on the type of goods.
Yeah, so not for excise goods, though.
Yeah, possibly not
for excise goods.
It depends what you're importing. If it was raw materials for production,
what we'll do for that,
be okay.
for that question, we'll put you in contact with Hillary and be able to work out from that, be able to help answer your question. So also some info on any changes to labelling on bottles of alcohol when exporting to the EU. I know there is some confusion around this.
Technically, the trade agreement that young Mr. Johnson and the EU agreed took into account all regulatory requirements regarding label bottling and everything. The United Kingdom on the 31st of December was meeting the EU requirements for labelling bottles. The trade agreement basically carried all forward those regulatory requirements, so there should be no need to change anything unless things change. That's what the trade agreement was basically about, maintaining commonality between the two countries, or the two blocks, should I say.
Perfect. Ian, have you got anything to expand on that?
No, I don't think so.
Perfect. So also we've got someone that's new to exporting, and they've been asked to send samples to various companies with a view to export. Do they need to be sending these samples using these systems, or is there another way?
Samples are treated exactly the same way as any other goods. Obviously, it does depend on the size of the sample. If you're sending a bottle of scotch to somebody in France, then you will have to use the same procedures, basically. If you're exporting it in duty suspension, EMCS, and export declaration, if you're importing it under drawback, you have to consider whether it's worthwhile you claiming the UK duty back on that one bottle of scotch. I would have thought that it wouldn't have been, but that is a decision that you have to make. When you get the goods into Europe, of course, you are then totally and utterly reliant on the procedures that are in place in France, Germany, or wherever. If they have a procedure in place whereby you can bring in samples free of any French or German duty, provided they are put to a certain use, shall we say, you can sniff them, you can hold it up to a light to test the colour, but you can't drink them, then they may allow those goods to go in free of duty. Or they may sort of like turn around and say, I'm sorry, we don't recognise samples, you pay the French duty on them. You will have to look up the French requirements, or more importantly, you would ask the person to whom you're sending the sample to, what are the French or the German requirements for bringing samples into your country, and you would need to take his advice on to what to do. And more importantly, you would need to tell him that he's got some obligations to actually comply with those obligations. So again, it's all about discussion with the importer in the country.
Perfect. Ian, have you got anything to add to that?
Not from too much experience, but just that if samples are perhaps being sent out via a fast parcel operator rather than a freight transport company, then I think their systems would guide you as to and handle things like the declaration, in that they bulk together.
It would definitely handle the import declaration into the country to which they're being posted to. But if you've declared on it that it's Scotch for a sample, they would just pay that member state's duty. So if you're going to France, they would require the importer, before he gets his parcel, to actually send them money equal to the French duty.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, but that sounds easier for a sample than probably
It does indeed. Using fast parcel operators would be easy in that instance. But whatever you do, don't describe it as a bottle of sand. You know, if you are sending a bottle of scotch, declare it as a bottle of scotch to the fast parcel operator. What you don't want to do is, when it goes to France, they've got methods by which to tell whether it's liquid or what have you. And they can open the case in France, and if it's a bottle of scotch, it will get seized. So please be honest when you're making the declaration.
Perfect. Will all goods now need to be labelled with the EU importer? If so, must this be the importer to that particular country, or can one importer be nominated to appear on all goods entering the EU?
From a customs point of view, I don't think it makes any difference. From a customs point of view, the importer in the EU will be required to make an EU import declaration, and that person, as the importer, will have the responsibilities for making that declaration. If he is acting on behalf of a number of people, then of course it's going to be very difficult for him to make that import declaration. If the person in France wants the goods in duty suspension, the person in Italy wants them duty paid, etc., etc. So again, it's all down to the person in France to make that choice as to what he wants to do with the goods. He is acting as the importer. He is making the declaration. The important thing to remember is that excise duty is a national tax and not an EU-wide tax. Therefore, you can import the goods into France and pay the French duty on them. That will not mean that you can move those goods for consumption in Germany. On the grounds of once you get to the French-German border, somebody will have to pay the German excise duty on it and potentially reclaim the French duty. So for excise goods, it does get complicated because you're dealing with 27 excise duty regulations as opposed to one customs duty regulation that applies to all 27 member states.
Perfect. So, which is better to use with a customs declaration? Is it EMCS or CHEIF, or do we need to complete both?
You need to complete both. EMCS is the Excise Movement and Control System, and that is mandatory for moving goods in duty suspension from the dispatching warehouse in the UK to the port, airport or rail terminal where the goods will physically leave the territory of the UK. The export declaration made into chief is in addition to and not replacing the EMCS documentation. And as I said, and as Ian confirmed earlier on, the EMCS document and the export declaration must be cross-referenced together by reference and using the ARC. The ARC on the EMCS document must be declared in box 40 of the export declaration.
Ian, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, just if people are changing over from procedures last year to new procedures this year, you would have normally declared from a tax warehouse to a tax warehouse would be the more common scenario. Now, from a tax warehouse to type 6, which is export.
Yeah, you have to remember that now we have left the EU, there is no such thing as a duty suspended movement from the UK to any other member state. It is a UK duty suspended movement from the UK to the port, airport or rail terminal in the UK. You then have to start a second duty suspension movement in Calais, Dunkirk or Charles de Gaulle Airport to move those goods to the tax warehouse in the other member state. They are now, where before it was one separate movement, they are now two distinctly separate movements.
Anything else from you, Ian?
No.
Perfect. So can you export other businesses' products made for a third party in duty suspense via a tax warehouse, or do you need a trade facility warehouse? For example, raw cider from a third party received in duty suspense and processed on site, then exported in duty suspense via EMCS?
No. The answer is, as we said at the very beginning, once goods are in duty suspension within the United Kingdom, then they are moved in duty suspension within the United Kingdom between tax warehouses. So the cider producer can move it to a processor. Both parties will be approved as a tax warehouse. The thing to understand and remember is that the tax warehouse is approved by HM Revenue and Customs subject to certain conditions and restrictions that they deem fit. So, the tax warehouse that produces the cider will have an approval issued by Revenue and Customs, and on that approval may be certain conditions and restrictions. They can be many, they can be varied, they may be none. Similarly, the processing plants will also be approved by Revenue and Customs as a tax warehouse, and that will have approval that may or may not have conditions and restrictions on it. If the warehouse approval has a restriction which prevents you from exporting the goods, then you can't export the goods. If that approval says you can only receive the cider from the producer and return it to the producer, then that is all that the second tax warehouse can do. However, if the approval states nothing, has no conditions, then the second tax warehouse can act as the consignor for the export, and that tax warehouse will complete, as Ian says, the Type 6 EMCS movement from his premises to the place that the goods will leave the territory of the United Kingdom. So again, it is all down to talking between various people and for the tax warehouse keeper to understand what any limits have been placed by Revenue and Customs on his approval. Thirdly, and finally, the owners of the goods may not necessarily be the warehouse keeper who is storing the goods. So if this imaginary second warehouse is approached by an other person saying, I'd like to purchase some of your cider, please, and export it in duty suspension to France, then that purchaser is the exporter of the goods, but the warehouse keeper is the person responsible for completion of the EMCS requirements for the movement of the goods. So therefore, again, people must talk to each other, and if there is any doubt, you should seek advice from either Revenue and Customs, if you are lucky enough to get an answer to their telephone helpline, which is highly helpful, or you contact somebody such as myself or Ian.
Ian, have you got anything to add to that point?
No.
Perfect. So we've got someone as well that's asking if we're going to cover anything to do with labelling requirements. We understand we can use the one FBO for the whole of the EU. What is the details of introducing the name and address, EU distributor? This saves putting importer for every country on our labels.
I'm afraid that's outside my area of expertise. I cannot comment.
Yeah,
Yep.
same.
Perfect. Also, just a point from Hillary in the chat that she does run a beer and cider and spirits exporting group, which is for peer-to-peer networking, and everyone does find it very useful. So if you are interested, please do contact Hillary. She has put her email address into the chat. Neil, can you put your email address in the chat? Yes, you can.
Right, I'll do it now.
So we've also, just wait for Neil to put that in, and then we can go with the next question. So we've only got a couple more questions. So if you have got any more questions, we've got around 8 more minutes. So we have got another 4 questions, but if there's any more, then do please put them in. So for clarification on the paperwork ARC number, we get this needs to be with the paperwork, but all the information I have read stated that a trade invoice, picking sheet, etc., as before, is required.
Don't think I can really answer that for more commercial documentation. If you wish to use that particular piece of commercial documentation as the goods accompanying document, then from a Revenue and Customs point of view, that is perfectly acceptable, provided the ARC is clearly shown on that document. That's the only thing I can comment about that.
Okay. Also, Ian's put into the chat from earlier that the country codes for the Channel Islands is GG for Guernsey and JE for Jersey, to answer one of the questions previously asked. Then we've got, when do we need to complete an EUR1 form? Is that for countries outside of the EU?
It is for countries outside the EU. However, the thing to remember is the EUR1 form was where the receiving country, say that would be Uganda or somewhere like that, had a trade agreement with the EU, and that trade agreement was for Uganda to allow EU originating goods into their country free of any Ugandan import duty. Since the United Kingdom has left the EU, then it would be for the United Kingdom to have a trade agreement with Uganda along the same lines, and I'm afraid you're going to have to, quote, watch this space for the trade agreements that the United Kingdom has with other countries outside of the EU to replace the overall previously EU trade agreements with that country.
Ian?
Yeah, I must admit I've not fully digested the published origin rules. I think customs an invoice declaration is now permissible.
An invoice declaration was always permissible before instead of an EUR1. So yeah, they've just carried that forward. But I agree with Ian. The rules of origin have changed slightly. But as a basic premise, and it is basic, for goods to be imported into a receiving country at a nil or preferential rate of duty, then one, the dispatching country must have an agreement with that country, and two, the goods have to originate in the dispatching country. Now, that doesn't originate. The status of origin doesn't mean that they are just sent from. So, a Nissan car might be built in the United Kingdom, but not necessarily. It doesn't mean that it originates in the United Kingdom, because, of course, it can contain goods that originate in Germany, in Japan, in America, or Malaysia, or anywhere. And that's where the rule of origin kicks in. So, as Ian says, excuse me, the gov.uk website on rules of origin will be required reading.
Perfect. I'd just like to point out as well that, Neil, you did put your wrong email address in. I have now put your correct email address in. So please, you missed the S.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So please go with Neil's email address from the one that I sent and DITSW events.
Oh, yeah, I apologize. Yeah.
Neil sent himself.
Yeah, sorry. It is exciseman@btinternet.com. I'm sorry for typing that.
So we've got the last question, which is, are the mentioned procedures and requirements applicable to the rest of the world as well?
The answer is yes. The answer is now there is only one procedure for exporting excise goods. It maketh no difference to which country they're going to, whether it's the United States of America or France. It is exactly the same procedure for removing goods from a UK tax warehouse to the port where the goods will leave the territory of the UK, or for duty paid goods to be removed to the port and a drawback claim submitted. There is no difference now at all. The EU is treated as any other foreign country.
Perfect. Now, we've got 2 minutes left, so Ian, I'm going to give you around 45 seconds just to say any last final points for today's event.
I didn't have anything prepared there, Mark. Maybe just slightly to add to that last question. Although, yeah, absolutely, the declaration types are now the same for non-EU and EU trade. There's some slight variations on the data on the declaration, mainly where you're dealing with what's called a RoRo port and a non-inventory linked port, where the inventory systems are not currently in place to upload a manifest back to Chief for the goods that are being carried. So you'll find there's some slight variations if you were doing a non-EU EMCS and export and an EU EMCS and export, just based on the port type and the operation there. And just to put it out there, if anyone wanted to contact me afterwards for anything that we've gone through today, I'll drop my email address in the chat as well, and people can pick that up as they wish.
Brilliant. Neil, I'm just going to pass over to you for 45 seconds until we finish the event.
Well, the same goes from me. It would be an impossible task to actually cover every single topic and variance in procedures relating to the export of excise goods in a session like we've got today. I am not touting for business, because when I retired and started up as this little consultancy, I said I'd work 5 days a month. I think I'm on day 12 or 13 of January so far, and it's only the 11th of January. But if anybody would like further training, then please contact me on the now corrected email address that I have given, and we can discuss what you need, etc., 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 and I am more than happy to oblige. Obviously, when we are allowed to travel again, then the possibility of actually coming down to your site, meeting your staff, training your staff if needs be, does become an option. But as I said at the very, very beginning, knowledge is king in this business, and the more knowledge your staff and yourselves have with regard to exporting excise goods, the easier, simpler and safer it will be for you. Do not assume if Fred in the pub tells you, oh, I do this, please do not assume that Fred is correct. Fred might not be. Please take care, but do not be frightened of exporting goods.
Well, I would just like to thank Ian and Neil. Thank you so much for today, and thank you, Hilary, for putting this event together. From myself, Business West, and the Department for International Trade Southwest, thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a good rest of your day and a good week. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.